Welcome, Ana Marie. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today and doing this interview. I definitely feel that you're an incredible trailblazer for women in leadership for the Latino community, and definitely a role model that I look up to very much. So I'm definitely excited for the conversation, and let's go ahead and get started.
Let's do it. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Definitely. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey within the nonprofit space and what drove you to lead large nonprofits such as the Ford Foundation, the Annie Cassie Foundation, and now Hispanics and Philanthropy?
Well, there's a caveat there. I didn't lead those foundations, but I did have really interesting roles in those foundations. But my journey really started way back. I was born in Puerto Rico, right there on the beach, and well, not on the beach, but I grew up in Isla Verde, which is a beautiful beach. If anybody hasn't been there, I encourage you to go. It's my little piece of paradise. When I was about 6 or 7, my family moved to Miami. And so there I lived in a little burbujita, which was Little Havana, which I'm sure many of you have gone. It's a very iconic place, especially in the 70s and 80s when I was there. It was very, very special time. We really clung to our fundamental values, and we were a close-knit community since we really were refugees and migrants, and each cycle. And I spent a lot of time really figuring out my identity. Was I Puerto Riqueña or Cubana? Oftentimes people make you choose, and I always wanted to not choose. I really embraced both parts of my heritage. But to get back to your question, at 15 years old, I was working in a pharmacy in downtown Miami in the Omni. And that's when everything burst from that burbujita, that little bubble that I told you earlier that I was living in, because 1980s Miami was at the center of the worst race riot that I had experienced to that date, and it was definitely the worst race riot to that time that had happened in Miami. And those were the Liberty City riots. This now happens, unfortunately, over and over. At that time, it was the first one for me. And I was at the rooftop watching the city of Miami burning. Especially hard hit was Liberty City, which was the neighborhoods where our African American brothers and sisters lived, and it was just devastating. And for me, that was a gut punch. That there was fire all around me, but that's what put fire in my belly in terms of putting me on a path to social justice and to understand that we had to do better and that I couldn't have my hands crossed and just stay as a bystander and do nothing. So that's when everything changed for me, and I went to university, and I always, like in Washington D.C., and I was working in Ayuda, which was a clinic working with immigrants from all over the world, actually. But then the war in El Salvador got very difficult, and we had an influx of El Salvadorians, and that's when I became involved in issues around Central America and La Frontera and migration. And we worked on domestic violence, so many things. That put me on a path to where I am now, which has been really about being where you're needed and making yourself useful. So yes, I was at the Annie Casey Foundation, at the Ford Foundation, developing new portfolios there. But I also was, at Unidos US, and I was at the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. And I did 2 stints in government with President Obama and President Clinton. So really looking at from what perspective and at what moment in time you can be most helpful. I've been at HIP now, I'm on my 7th year, and this has been truly transformational. My first year was really important because I felt that we couldn't transform the organization without listening. And so lots of people do listening tours. I went to 45 cities in less than 6 months. It was obviously before COVID. So you actually were doing it in person. And from there, it's where I really got an understanding of how we can build more than a membership organization, but what I feel is a movimiento, something that's living and breathing, and we call it the collective corazón. sounds maybe corny, but to me it's really real because it is really breathing and living, and it is about a movement and about how do we get from here to there. How do we respond and refine, and how do we make sure that it's collective and that it's about love, because philanthropy is about love of humanity.
No, absolutely. And I think working in the nonprofit, it gives you that opportunity, right, to find a cause that you're very passionate about and to be able to move that cause forward. So you briefly touched about your work in government. I know you were at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for 5 years. What are some of the things you learned during your time there that continues to inform or impact your work today?
I did two stints. My first stint, I was working in the policy shop, and I learned, I mean, Department of Housing and Urban Development. I learned how what communities are successful, are able to get ahead and thrive, and at what moments in time communities are left behind and the reasons why. And so that was really important because it set into motion an understanding that no one sector can do it alone, that we do need philanthropy, government, the nonprofit sector, and business all together. It's one of the reasons, like, for example, at HIP, we have something called Inicio Ventures. And when we first started Inicio Ventures, people were like, huh, aren't you about funding and and supporting the nonprofit community? And this was during the beginning of COVID, and I was like, no, if we don't have strong businesses, we don't have Latino entrepreneurs, we're not building our wealth, we don't have Latino philanthropists. Ultimately, we're always going to be with a tin cup asking others to support us. We need to make sure, especially during COVID, that all of our mom and pops, all of the taquerias, the beauty parlors, the bakeries, and notario, that they all stayed in business. So during the beginning of COVID, we started giving grants, $5,000 grants to businesses in Los Angeles, in El Paso, in Miami, to make sure that they stayed in business. So that's why I went to government, understanding that we needed to understand how all of these sectors came together. And I started the office, which still exists today, so it was really exciting, of international and philanthropic innovation, understanding that sectors need to learn from each other. What can we borrow? What can we get inspired from? Not only like one sector from the other, but also in the US, which we're extra, but what do we learn from what's happening in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Indonesia or China, whatever place it is? But paying attention and adapting. I once went to work for a guy that said, I want you to make mistakes. And I looked at him and I was like, what? You want me to make mistakes? He said, yes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not innovating. And if you're not innovating, what's the use? You need to be making mistakes, but you need to go with benefit. Don't make mistakes twice, but make mistakes once. And so that was part of the culture. And that's what I try and bring to HIP as well.
I love that. Yeah, because a lot of times we get so focused on, not making a mistake or being scared of mistakes, but I think, that they're incredible learning opportunities and, we can't grow without learning from our failures and our mistakes. Having covered a little bit about your work in the nonprofit as well as in government, is there a particular initiative or project that stands out to you that you could say was a very proud moment for you to have supported or have led?
I love all of our babies. So it's really hard to say one particular moment. But I talked about Inicio, which I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of our work around what I call PB&J, not peanut butter and jelly, but power building and justice. Now more than ever important, more than ever, because we have to build our build civic engagement, build voice, build trust. I Since I've just come back from Mexico City, I arrived late last night. I was there last week for International Women's Day. I mean, I was so proud to see, 1 million women on the streets of Mexico City exercising their right to march and to express themselves. And that was just extraordinary. I also had the opportunity to go to my first in-person giving circle in Mexico City, and that was exciting as well.
Oh, wow.
To see, yeah, you know, it was the first time all of these folks are pop-ups. They're doing giving circles. You can do them like all the time, but you can also just go to pop-up giving circles on a Tuesday night, you know, and there's, you know, antojitos and little things like that. And we had three fabulous, since it's Women's Month, we had three fabulous organizations representing women's organizations. One was called Comando Colibri, which was young women that are learning all about martial arts as an effort to protect themselves and self-confidence, right? There was another one with emprendedoras, you know, young entrepreneurs that are learning to be self-sufficient, heads of family, and, you know, how can they be self-sufficient for their families? The last one was women in Juarez who work in maquilas that unfortunately labor circumstances are really difficult, and so you have to choose. Well, you're supposed to choose one of them. We ended up choosing two of them and doubling the pool of dollars, and being able to give it to them. But things like that, every time you see it, it's like we are changing the world grain of sand by grain of sand, and it was just wonderful. So Hip Give is a platform that we created, free, bilingual, which allows all of these nonprofits to develop campaigns so that even if they don't have fancy resource development shops, they can have the autonomy and the to be able to put up these campaigns so that we can learn about them and so that we can have these pop-ups. We also have digital giving circles. I'm part of those. And we have the different campaigns. Right now we have Go Mujeres. And I'd love for folks to get on Go Mujeres and check it out. It's just really inspiring to see what organizations are doing.
That's incredible. Yeah, especially for the smaller and medium-sized nonprofits who don't have a lot of opportunities to get that exposure or to even be an affiliate of a bigger entity, because of course there's budget limitations and budget constraints. But that's incredible that you all are expanding those opportunities to them.
Absolutely. Last week we also had, and I wasn't able to go to that, but South by Southwest, you're in Texas. I don't know if you had a chance to go, but we had our first ever La Casa, La Startup Casa. It's about that, you know, we were talking about it earlier. Startup Casa is a place for us to celebrate this Latino startup ecosystem, really looking at how as Latinos, we're underinvested. I don't know if you know these numbers, and I mean, I'll just go into numbers for a second, but 1% of philanthropy goes to the Latino nonprofits. That's
Wow.
terrible, just 1%. After all these years that we're 20% of the population. But what's on the other side? Only 1% of venture dollars go to Latino businesses, to our brilliant young people that have great ideas. So, I mean, these are both mirroring each other. That's why we have Inicio Ventures. And I'm so excited about La Casa that we had last week, because it like brought all of the industry leaders and entrepreneurs, investors, all really showcasing our startups, our achievements, how innovative our people are. Hopefully some of them will get invested in, but we're really proud of this new casa that we have, and I'm excited to see like what happened there. I'm sure wonderful magic.
Yeah, for sure. Was that in Austin?
Yeah, that was South by Southwest last week.
Oh, okay. I haven't had the opportunity to join, but yes, I saw some of the posts on social media and it looked absolutely incredible. So I look forward to hopefully joining in the future. Going off on a different path now, you've been at the forefront of Latino philanthropy and in the nonprofit space, and I definitely feel that there's been so many new trends out there emerging for us. Having the opportunity to also lead a nonprofit in an organization in South Texas called VIDA, I see firsthand a significant push toward cross-sector collaboration, which you've touched on. And I can say that whether a nonprofit's focus is education, housing, or food insecurity, I definitely feel that there's a growing desire and a growing need to build these partnerships with industry, with employers, with institutions of higher education, with community-based organizations, and of course, governments. In your opinion, what are some key trends that you see impacting the nonprofit sector, especially for organizations being led by Latinas or Latinos?
There's a lot of answers to that question. Um, it feels like our community is in a constant recovery, right? We went through 2008 and 2009 through that Great Recession. It took us 10, 11, 12 years to recuperate all of the wealth that we lost in 2008 and 2009. And then came 2020, 2021, and we were disproportionately impacted by the recession, right? And so we're back to where we started from. That's difficult. That's difficult. And we saw blips in giving that was inspiring and encouraging at the very beginning, but all of the increase in donations that we saw, especially after George Floyd was murdered, all of that is starting to either go down or never actually did materialize. There was a lot of commitments that were made that never got followed up on, or those dollars that were committed by philanthropies and corporate philanthropy as well, actually were invested into internal, like DEI type initiatives, and didn't ever make it to the community. So that's really difficult to watch. But on the other side, we've witnessed a lot of inspiring work that the nonprofits are doing. That there's so much around mutual aid. I was talking about giving circles earlier. Those have really strengthened and grown. And so, though all of this is coming into us as we're watching AI like unfold in literally minutes, and watching how is that going to affect us. Supreme Court decisions like the affirmative action decision that happened last summer, which ostensibly is just around education. We're watching it very closely. How is it going to impact foundations, philanthropy, and all other things? Because in essence, it affects contracts and grants. And so that could really change the face of what we've been looking at. So digital transformation is really key that we need to watch. The future of DEI, what's that going to look like because of the Supreme Court decision? And we need to really watch it. So we're working on all of these issues. Digital philanthropy is very important to us. We have an all-fem team, which is really cool, all women led. So we're really building lots of stuff there on narrative change, digital products and tools, all of this with an eye towards democratizing philanthropy, not just in the US, but really all across the Americas and Puerto Rico, the Caribbean. So we're doing that around DEI. We're paying attention to the affirmative action, and we're looking at how we strengthen narratives around Latinos, Latines, so that we are seen as givers. I was just with Ana Valdez from the Latino Donors Collaborative. I'll put a plug there. She's receiving an award from us this summer at our conference in Chicago. The work that she does around putting out information that demystifies who we are. If we were a country, Latinas living here in the US alone, not even all of the Americas, just in the US, we would be the 5th largest economy in the world. That's spectacular, right? People don't know that. So all of this shift about like what is the understanding and what is the reality, that's about us. That's what we're doing, really shifting that, because we have to look at, narrative change. We have to look at economy and, economic transformation. We need to look at political and social, this stool has several legs.
Yeah, that's incredible. And going off a little bit about that reality that you're mentioning, so we know, like you said, the Latinx population makes up about 20% of the US population, yet Latinx accounts for only 10% of nonprofit executive directors and less than 3% of foundation CEOs or presidents. And of course, we face other challenges as well. But in your opinion, what opportunities do you see Latinas, Latinos having that are leading nonprofit organizations despite these barriers that we strive to overcome?
Yeah, I think it all starts at the top. Yeah, I learned a little sentence that I love. Dem Demographics is not destiny. What does that mean? Even if you're in places, I'm calling you from New Mexico right now, but you go to Texas, you go to California, other places where, there's lots of Latinos, you would think we would have a lot more power, but we don't necessarily have a lot of power. And so, yes, we've managed to build pipeline. So I'm encouraged because we have lots of folks that are emerging leaders. You said about CEOs. So that's great. The pipeline is strong. We don't have enough, but there is a pipeline. What we don't have is trustees, right? Folks at the board of directors. And in the end, you can have fabulous staff, a fabulous CEO, but if your trustee is saying, no, 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 your trustees are not there with you, then you get stuck. So I have my eye on how do we change the face of trustees in philanthropy, trustees in corporate America, trustees all across. That's really, really key. So, but while we're doing that, we don't keep we keep our eyes on, all of those folks that are in the pipeline. We have an amazing fellowship that is called Líderes. And Líderes is for folks that are mid-career, folks like you. I hope you apply, Felida, that are either in the
Yes.
nonprofit or in the foundation space that are interested in expanding their network, are expanded in working in a place that is, from a space of healing justice, that you have the tools. So that when things get difficult, you have a place to get oxygen, you have a network that's going to support you. All of these things are really important in addition to being extremely talented and creative. We
Absolutely.
all need these places where we get oxygen, where we have a network, where people are there to support us. And so I'm really excited about our Líderes program because it does bring together mid-careers in both philanthropy and the nonprofit space, and the magic that they create when they're together. It's great. Also, oftentimes, and that happened to me when we were talking about my trajectory. I mean, I was always a nonprofit person. The last thing I expected was to get pulled from a nonprofit space and to be thrown into philanthropy. But that happens more and more. In old times, the previous generation, philanthropy was usually staffed with academic people that were picked from universities. And that was not a good model because those folks didn't have lived experience. That is a really good shift that has happened in philanthropy now. Whereas more and more the folks that are chosen to be program officers, directors, and are coming from the nonprofit space, from grassroots, from community, they do have that lived experience. But that's also terrifying because if you've never worked in philanthropy and you're dropped into philanthropy, you're like, what do I do here? And so
Yeah.
we wanted folks to have a built-in network so that it's not scary, so that they can have a head running start and be effective from day one.
Yeah, and from a nonprofit perspective, I have definitely see that shift. I can say personally now on a lot of grant applications, it'll have a specific question geared toward board development and board engagement and asking specifically, okay, what percentage of your board members can relate to the population that you're serving? If
Mhm.
you're serving Latinos, how much of your board is comprised of Latino leadership? So I think that's definitely a positive trend that we're seeing.
Yep, yep. The limited funding, since we're at the beck and call of the stock market, and that means that we don't have consistent, long-term, fully flexible, dollars. That's something that I hope, I've seen that go in a little circle. Some foundations immediately went there after COVID and have stayed there. Others are retrenching. So we have to keep our eyes on that as well. Flexible dollars, gen ops dollars, because in the end, those are the dollars that allow us as nonprofits to be nimble and to be able to respond to the needs in our communities. So I would lift that up as well.
Absolutely. And that's a very real and ongoing challenge that nonprofits face, right? Limited resources and high levels of competition. But at the same time, I think that brings us to another point, which is the importance of, storytelling, and how do you build a brand for yourself? How do you market yourself, not only among your community, among your region, but even beyond that on a state or national level? So in your opinion, what are ways that nonprofits could possibly leverage data and storytelling to showcase their impact, especially when attracting a new funding opportunity?
Hmm, that's a really good question, because they need to see not just like the superficial stuff, but like also the dots behind the work, the why and the who. And it's so easy to oversimplify, especially when you're talking to media. They catch um the high level taglines and don't necessarily go underneath. So your question is a good one, and I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I feel I think, yeah, everything is boiled down to social media and what you're putting on your Instagram or on your these pages. I feel like, for example, we like to do study trips and learning tours, and we do a couple every year. We bring people to where things are happening, and that's important because when you're able to see and hear and talk to folks, I did that last week in Mexico, and it just shifts the narrative that we make up in our heads. And you can look at it with, your heart comes in. Everything is both your head, the numbers, which we always provide, but you have to get people to pay attention in a different way with the heart. And so that's important. Our study trips are important, but also, I guess, our HIP conference, which I mentioned earlier, is a really great place if you don't have time for a week-long study trip to go to a 2-day conference, because that's where we bring like innovators and cutting edge folks who are doing the work, and we're able to showcase it. I really do think that in addition to reading reports and reading, numbers, to have that real narrative change, I guess is where I'm going with all of this, is you also need your heart, something in your spirit. And so if you have the opportunity, and that's what we try and do, of really connecting the dots so that folks can understand the numbers, but also understand and meet the real people that are doing the work and impacted, that's where magic is. We do lots of campaigns where we're showing rather than telling funders what our communities need. Different campaigns. We talked about some of the women's campaigns, some of the work that we're doing around migrants and refugees right now. I was in Mexico City. A lot of what we're seeing in cities here, like in Denver and Chicago, New York, DC, with buses of migrants. Mexico City is experiencing that as well. I was going to visit a grantee, but outside of the grantee's offices, there was tents and tents. There was 1,200 people in a park. They're just dealing with all of this. And I knew that because I had read about it, but actually seeing 1,200 people in a pop-up camp that the city is trying to figure out how to deal with, um, just gave me a different understanding.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think location is, and even perception, it's relative to a lot of things. So, what is our reality in South Texas may be completely different to someone in New York or Chicago or LA. We had a visit actually a few weeks ago from someone up north who is leading a national organization related to medical equipment technology, and he came and did a tour of our installation and some visits with partners, and these people left incredibly not only impressed, but I would say inspired, because they were completely honest and transparent, and told us, when we hear about South Texas, like precisely the Rio Grande Valley, which is 4 hours south of San Antonio, you don't expect much. You expect, we're a border region, there's high poverty rates, low levels of, education attainment. So the standard is very low. But like you mentioned, being able to take that visit and see with your own eyes through the people's lens of the reality and the potential that the community has through collaboration is truly inspiring and impactful.
I'm so glad you're doing that. Yeah. My first visit to La Frontera is, I will never forget. It just changes you in so many ways.
Absolutely. Now, before we close, as we are getting to the end of our time, for anyone wanting to support local nonprofits, do you have recommendations on how to choose a particular nonprofit to support, a focus area? What would be your advice?
Well, our HIP Give platform, which is, you can find it by going to hiphipfunds.org, has fully vetted organizations that we have over 1,000 grantees in our database. So whether you're interested in an organization working on Venezuelan migrants, or you're interested in working on gender equity or education or climate change, we do a lot around climate change or the intersection of climate and migration, whatever you want to fund or donate to, you can do that through the HIP Give platform. And as I said earlier, it's completely free. It lives off of what we call HIP tip. So if you want to leave a tip for HIP, so to continue providing this service, but the fabulous thing about HIP Give is that you can provide donations to organizations here in the US and you get your tax deduction. Or if you want to donate to an organization that's doing great work in Mexico or in Puerto Rico or in Colombia, you can do that as well. So that's one easy way. If you want to ratchet it up, you can join one of our giving circles, which I mentioned, those are either digital or we're starting to do them in, pop up and pop up and in person. You can apply for the HIP Fellowship, which I'd love to have you on, Felida. And that's a really diverse group of mid-careers that are working in philanthropy and nonprofit. We only have one cohort a year. But it's 30 folks get to participate each year. We already have 300, an alumni network that's really strong and does things. You can come to our conference, which will be taking place June 20th and 21st in Chicago this year. The following year, it will be in Albuquerque. The conference rotates so that at one point in time, it'll be close to you and you can come and join, but you don't have to be a member of HIP to come to the conference. Everyone is invited. That takes me to the last, I guess, opportunity is anybody can be a member of HIP. We have opportunities for folks that are just emerging professionals, shall we say, that are starting their career. And so it can be as cheap as $150, or it can be a full member for $250, or you can be an organizational member, but you can be a member of HIP and join what I called our collective corazon, be part of our movement. Or you can follow us on social media. We put a lot of attention into social media because we know that people get their information that way. So we're always pumping out information through social media. So following us on social media it would be wonderful as well, because that's how we communicate and we share what's important and what's happening. And you all in the community share back to us. It's como el corazón, like the heart, right? It's a loop, and it's important for us all to be in communication.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Ana Marie, so much for your time today. And thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing at Hispanics and Philanthropy. It was a wonderful opportunity to get to know you and learn about your career track over the years. And I definitely look forward to staying in touch. And thank you again for everything.
Likewise, Felida, it's such a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Good. Bye.